Coffee is often treated as a simple pleasure, a daily ritual, something so familiar that we rarely stop to question what's actually in the cup. But over the last decade, a quieter pattern has emerged, one that doesn't show up in bold warnings or ingredient lists. It appears instead in lab testing, in long-term exposure data, and in the way certain symptoms slowly accumulate rather than arrive all at once. For many people, coffee itself isn't the problem. The issue is how coffee is grown, processed, stored, and altered long before it ever reaches a mug. Mold byproducts, pesticide residues, heavy metals, and aggressive processing methods don't usually cause immediate reactions. They work subtly, especially in people who drink coffee daily for years, and especially as the body's detox capacity changes with age. This matters even more in households with pets. While coffee is clearly unsafe for animals, the risks don't only come from obvious exposure like spilled drinks. Grounds, flavored creamers, and trash bin leftovers can introduce compounds that animals process very differently than humans, often with delayed or misunderstood symptoms. If content like this matters to you, subscribing to Food Red Flag helps support careful, non-alarmist food education that looks beyond labels and marketing. The goal here isn't fear, it's clarity. What often goes unnoticed is that most coffee drinkers never actually choose their coffee, they inherit it. Whether it's from office machines, hotel buffets, grocery store defaults, or just long-standing habits formed years earlier, the choice is rarely deliberate. Many large-scale coffee brands, well, they rely on sourcing and processing shortcuts that are legal, affordable, and profitable, but not necessarily aligned with long-term health awareness. One of the most overlooked issues, honestly, is mold contamination, particularly mycotoxins. Coffee beans are grown in humid regions, harvested in bulk, and often stored or transported under conditions where mold growth is just really difficult to fully prevent. Some brands do invest heavily in testing and slow processing to reduce this risk. Others, though, rely on roasting alone to mask off flavors, even though roasting does not reliably eliminate mycotoxins. Over time, low-level exposure has been associated in research with immune stress and increased inflammatory load, especially in people who already have gut sensitivity or compromised liver detox pathways. Another quiet factor is pesticide concentration. Coffee is actually one of the more chemically treated crops in conventional agriculture. While individual residues may fall within regulatory limits, daily consumption can lead to cumulative exposure. This is especially relevant for older adults whose metabolic clearance often slows with age, and for people who drink multiple cups a day without much variation. Many widely consumed coffee brands also use lower-grade beans that are more likely to include defects. These defects don't always change taste dramatically once roasted dark, but they do change chemical composition. Dark roasting is frequently used to standardize flavor and obscure inconsistencies, not to improve safety. The bitterness that many people associate with strong coffee is often a signal of aggressive roasting compensating for poor raw material. Instant coffee deserves separate attention. The dehydration and reconstitution processes can concentrate certain contaminants, including acrylamide, a compound formed during high heat processing. While occasional consumption is unlikely to be significant, daily reliance, especially in older adults, adds another layer of cumulative exposure that most people never consider. Flavored coffees introduce additional concerns. Artificial flavorings and sweetened coatings may seem minor, but they alter how coffee interacts with blood sugar regulation and gut bacteria. In pets, these additives can be particularly dangerous. Dogs and cats are far more sensitive to compounds like xylitol, artificial sweeteners, and caffeine itself. Even small amounts licked from cups or ingested from discarded grounds can cause symptoms that appear hours later, such as restlessness, vomiting, or abnormal heart rhythms. These effects are often misattributed to unrelated illness because the exposure wasn't obvious. Another issue which is rarely discussed is how coffee interacts with mineral absorption. Certain low-quality coffees contain higher levels of compounds that actually bind minerals like iron and magnesium. Over the years, this can subtly affect your nutritional status, especially in people who already have marginal intake or absorption issues. The effect is gradual, not dramatic, and that's probably why it's so often ignored. So when we talk about coffee brands to avoid, it's not really about naming villains, it's about recognizing patterns, brands that prioritize cost over sourcing transparency, that rely heavily on dark roasts to cover inconsistencies, or that provide very little information about testing and origin, tend to carry higher hidden risks. This is especially true for mass-market brands that dominate the shelves, but rarely discuss how their beans are handled before roasting. On the other side of the spectrum, there are coffees that are cleaner, not because they're trendy, but because their production methods actually reduce exposure risks. These brands tend to emphasize single-origin sourcing, controlled storage, slower drying methods, and routine third-party testing. They often taste smoother, not due to additives, but simply because the beans themselves are healthier before roasting. For pet owners, awareness extends beyond personal consumption. Coffee grounds are, honestly, one of the most common sources of accidental caffeine poisoning in dogs, especially when compost bins or trash bags are left accessible. Now, cats are less likely to ingest grounds directly, but flavored creamers and residues on surfaces can still pose risks. Symptoms in animals may not appear immediately, and, mild restlessness or gastrointestinal upset is sometimes dismissed until it escalates. Age also plays a role in how coffee affects people. Younger adults often tolerate stimulants and minor contaminants without noticeable effects. As people age, though, sleep architecture changes, liver enzyme activity shifts, and sensitivity to stimulants increases. Coffee that once felt energizing may gradually contribute to anxiety, disrupted sleep, or digestive discomfort, not because coffee is inherently harmful, but because the body's relationship with it evolves. What's often misunderstood is that reducing risk doesn't require elimination. It requires selectivity, rotating coffee sources, choosing brands that publish testing standards, avoiding heavily flavored or ultra-dark roasts, and paying attention to how coffee is stored at home all matter more than perfection. It's also worth noting that decaffeinated coffee is not automatically safer. Some decaffeination methods use chemical solvents that leave trace residues. Cleaner methods exist, such as water-based processes, but they are not universal. Again, the issue is not immediate toxicity, but long-term exposure patterns. For households with pets, simple habits make a meaningful difference. Keeping coffee grounds sealed, rinsing mugs promptly, avoiding leaving cups unattended, and being cautious with flavored products reduce accidental exposure. These steps are rarely discussed, yet they prevent many emergency veterinary visits each year. Coffee culture often frames discussion in extremes. Either coffee is a superfood or it's a problem to eliminate. The reality is quieter and more nuanced. Coffee is a daily exposure, not a one-time event. Its impact depends on quality, quantity, frequency, and individual biology. When those factors are ignored, small issues accumulate. Food awareness is not about fear. It's about understanding that everyday foods carry invisible variables and that informed choices compound over time just as exposures do. Coffee is one of the most consumed substances in the world. That alone makes it worth examining carefully. If this kind of calm, evidence-based food guidance is valuable to you, consider subscribing to Food Red Flag. Sharing this video helps others think more clearly about the foods they assume are harmless, both for themselves and for the animals who share their homes. Long-term health is rarely shaped by dramatic decisions. It's shaped by the quiet ones we repeat every day.